Why take a vacation when you can beercation instead? Explore the world one pint at a time and join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming group tours, like Going Dutch, Beer in the Netherlands, with award-winning Dutch beer and travel writer Tim Skelton. As the author of Beer in the Netherlands and Around Amsterdam in 80 Beers, join Tim April 29th through May 11th, 2023 for 11 beery nights as he explores the sights, history, culture, and beer of this often overlooked beercation destination. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. All About Beer is back, and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts. Oregon is pretty close to my own personal idea of perfection. It is a little bit of everything, from vibrant, engaging cities to sweeping picturesque coastlines and mountain-high deserts. While the landscape is fascinating, the people and the culture might surpass it. Tucked into the northwestern corner of this Pacific Northwest gem of a state is a city with an outsized beer reputation. Today, we're exploring Portland, Oregon. Known for its outdoor-friendly lifestyle, craft beer, coffee scene, and the looming presence of Mount Hood, Portland is vibrant, lively, and full of character and characters. And in this episode, we explore not only the great local beer scene, but the cast of characters who have put Portland firmly in the center of any discussion about the world's greatest beer cities. And to do so, we're joined today by perhaps the two best sources on the local beer scene. Jeff Allworth is a longtime beer writer, author of several books, including The Beer Bible, and the co-host of the Beervana podcast. He has taught courses about beer and the business of beer, and has freelanced for a ton of publications. He's also one of the last beer bloggers standing. Jeff frequently posts his thoughts on beer, culture, and the business of beer at his award-winning blog, Beervana. He is a passionate advocate for all things Portland, and we're lucky to have him help guide us this week. Our second guest is Ezra Johnson Greeno, who is the founder of The New School, which is a great web magazine covering beer and cider in Oregon and Washington. New School is the kind of resource that every beer-loving region would be lucky to have, and as Jeff says, Ezra is the most plugged-in source to the beer happenings in Portland. A native Portlander, Ezra covers beer industry news, style trends, and does interviews and offers commentary along with organizing festivals and events. Stay tuned at the end of the episode to hear my favorite local place to have a beer, and the place is a true character itself. No one episode could hope to capture all that Portland has to offer, but that's not our purpose on the show. We're here to talk about the best of Portland's beer scene. So let's get our Portland visit started with our special guests, Jeff Allworth and Ezra Johnson Greeno. For Beer Travelers, I'm Andy Crouch. Well, Jeff and Ezra, thank you for joining me on this episode of Beer Travelers, where we're traveling to your home cities, Portland, Oregon.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to talk about Portland.
Yeah, there's not a lot going on there, and I do apologize to both of you because I know this will be a little bit of a boring and trying episode, but we'll see what we can do with the limited offerings that Portland has. Hopefully, we'll get a full 45 minutes out of it, maybe only 15. We'll find out. But I guess we can start off kind of easy here, and we'll start off with Jeff, who is not actually a Portland native, but in coming to Portland, what was your sort of first impressions of the city? And, I don't know if you were a beer drinker at that time or particularly interested in it. How would you, characterize the Portland beer scene then and how it's evolved?
Yeah, so I came here to go to college. So I was 18, but I'm old. So that was a long time ago. That was the mid 80s. And I didn't really start drinking beer until a little later. Although it might have been before I turned 21. We'll just leave. I think the statute of limitations is probably,
You may be old enough that maybe it was lawful then. We don't know. We're not going to go back and look.
It was definitely way less illegal then. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough.
Was the 80s. So it was early in the craft era, there were not very many breweries, but there were more breweries here than there were in other cities in the country. And even by the early 1990s, I think in part because of a Brewers Festival we have here called the Oregon Brewers Fest. The city had really become associated with beer, as early as the early 1990s. People who read me know that my blog is called Beervana. I just sort of adopted that because it was sort of the nickname of the city. And that nickname was, already part of the city. People were already calling it that by the early mid 90s. So the city has for a long time been associated with beer. And I think part of that may go back to the Henry Weinhardt's brewery, which was located on Burnside, just down, like literally in the center of downtown. So it scented the city with the smell of boiling wort. Everybody had a kind of sense of what local beer was like, going back to 1856, 1862. I don't know. Maybe Ezra remembers the date that brewery was founded. Anyway, a long time ago, mid 19th century. This has been a beer city. We have Great Western Malting across the river in Vancouver. We have the hop fields an hour south. It's a beer city. It's a beer region. We had Lucky Lager, across the river, Olympia, Rainier. We've always had a lot of beer here. So I think craft beer hit the ground running.
And Ezra, Jeff referenced the term Beervana, which is one that is often thrown around to characterize, the Portland beer scene. I know I believe you're from Portland, correct?
Yep. Born and raised in Portland. Moved away for a while to the San Francisco and came back.
And what are your impressions of, how the Portland beer scene has developed in your time of drinking?
I mean, yeah, quite a bit. I mean, my first experiences with beer were the Henry Weinhardt's brewery. Although I was too young to drink it, I remember distinctly walking around downtown with my dad and seeing the billowing smoke and smelling it everywhere. But then when I became 21, there was a few breweries. It was mostly like amber ales and Hefeweizens, and most places to get craft beer was mostly buy the bottle or go directly to the place. You didn't see the taps. But then we had great places like Belmont Station, and I think really started kind of spreading the gospel for people that weren't going directly to the breweries. And then I think it kind of like started to really blow up in 2009. I mean, the scene was growing like incrementally, but I think 2009 is where it really started to take off.
And what was it about that point that you think things started to change? Because and I definitely want to talk about some of the original players in the Portland beer scene, because there's a lot of really great old names there and a lot of history. But what happened in about 2009 that changed things?
I think it was people who had limited success in the industry and the beer scene, decided to start their own places or new places. 2009 is when Upright Brewing opened, and Alex from there worked at Belmont Station at the time. A lot of people that worked at Belmont Station at the time, including myself, by the way, went on to start other breweries or work at various breweries. Places started getting enough popularity that they're like throwing some money out. I think this was a height of Portland started becoming a trendy town, so there was more money coming in here, more people buying, more people trying different drinks. So it just started to grow, where people were like, I want to start my own thing. And then, it took a couple years, but within a couple years, it was like everybody was doing it,
I feel like in the entirety of the time that I have been writing about beer, which is a little bit over 20 years at this point, talking like Jeff, I'm another one of the kind of old guys of the scene, it feels like at this point. Portland, at least from when I started writing, was already kind of established. It was already one that had a reputation that people, if you love beer, you knew about Denver, you knew about Portland, San Diego, some places like that. Jeff, for those, back in sort of the early days, we've talked around, some of the names here, like, Weinhardt's and things like that. But what are, some of the town's original players, and what are some of the histories there? I know that, frankly, you've even just written a history book about one of them.
Yeah, Ezra's right to point to sometime in the mid to late 2000s as a kind of a second or maybe even a third act. I'm not really sure. and it followed these now legacy breweries, many of which are either sold or gone, that started in the 1980s. Bridgeport was the first brewery to get beer into the marketplace. Actually, there was a brewery called Cartwright that came and went in the late 70s, early 80s. And then of the ones that stuck, there was Bridgeport, which is no longer with us. And Widmer, I think, actually founded the company first, but got beer out second. And they are now owned entirely by Anheuser-Busch. Portland Brewing was another early brewery, which is also not with us. One of the earliest breweries is a chain of brew pubs and pubs called the McMinimans, and they are still trucking along. And I think one of the things that I would point to that's kind of distinctive, that dates back to that era about Portland, is it's really a brew pub town. We definitely have some tap rooms now, more than we ever have had before. But there was an expectation coming from the 1980s that if you had a brewery, you would have a place to go, and you could also get a meal there. And I think the McMinimans are kind of the forgotten piece of Portland's identity, because they've never made very good beer, and they also don't have great food, so they're kind of overlooked. They have extraordinary properties, so people like to go there because they buy these old buildings and completely restore them beautifully. But you can always get a burger at a McMinimans, and there's dozens of them, several dozen of them across the Portland area. So it kind of created this idea of a brew pub. And if you go all the way to the modern era, one of our kind of buzz breweries of the modern era is called Great Notion, and they really look back to the McMinimans too. They have started their own kind of mini chain, and they offer food. It's really kind of a Portland thing. If you go to other cities like Minneapolis or even Seattle, you'll find way, way, way more tap rooms and not so many brew pubs. So I think that's kind of where our vibe came from in the 1980s.
Ezra, oftentimes when we talk about, talk in other cities about some of the original players, oftentimes those folks are still trucking along. They're still doing, maybe they're falling a little bit on hard times, or they've managed to pivot and figure out how to find their place in the modern brewing world, which is, changed and iterated so many different times over the last couple decades. Portland does seem to have some places that have fallen by the wayside. And, I've only been to Portland a handful of times, but, I have, these are names that I grew up in the beer scene with and have love for, like places like Bridgeport. And why do you think that, some places like those have not stood the test of time? Or, I mean, frankly, they stood for a really long time, but, why have they not survived into kind of the modern beer era?
Well, I think there's two main reasons. I mean, I think one, just the younger drinkers don't necessarily have the respect or for those older breweries. Sometimes I feel like they don't actually get a fair shot with the younger drinkers, because they kind of come off as your father's brewery. But then also you have to level some criticism at them too for not keeping up with times. Bridgeport, I think, is the ultimate example, which was the most relevant brewery and was the thing, when I was getting into beer, and they took forever to change. And then when they did change, the changes they made weren't what anyone was clamoring for. And it was like they lost their soul, and it was too little too late. But there's other breweries that have been around for a while that I'm like, they continue to innovate and push ahead, but it's more difficult for them to find the younger audience when you have like sexier breweries like Great Notion, as Jeff mentioned.
I think one thing that is interesting about Portland is there's always been, in the craft era, there's always been good beer, and we have one of the most educated drinker base in the country, and so it's really, really competitive. And so these older breweries, like Ezra said, started making kind of mediocre beer, not necessarily poorly made beer, but not interesting beer. And that's tough in Portland. It's like being in New York City. You can be the buzz restaurant, but after 10 years, if you're kind of looking a little long in the tooth and you haven't innovated and you're not keeping up with trends, you're out the door. Portland has a little bit of that going on, and I think it really has to do with how many people drink beer here. Like everybody drinks beer
Yeah.
here. It's really penetrated deeply. Men, women, you know, all ages, everybody.
One of the breweries that I wanted to talk about that sort of fits in between, it's sort of this, one of these original or older breweries, but also one that, will soon, if not already, be no longer and is a cult favorite, is Hair of the Dog. I'm not even sure where to start. You could do a whole episode or two on Hair of the Dog and Allen and its role in the development of beer in the United States and extreme beer and just pushing the envelope. But I think it's a place that deserves a couple of minutes of time here. And I'll start with Ezra. What was it about Hair of the Dog? I just don't even know the question I want to ask because it's such a rebel. Just talk about Hair of the Dog. I guess I usually ask questions, but with them, I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
You could almost sum it up as what's up with Hair of the Dog, because that was kind of the thing. It was like it was so different. It was even different till the end. They are closed now. But yeah, there was nothing else like it, and it really epitomized the kind of do-it-yourself approach. It was anti brew pub in a way too. Originally, as Jeff said, I agree with Jeff with the brew pub culture was big, but they were one of the first ones that was like, we're not doing that. They were by the train tracks. You had to do a dock sale. They were one of the first places that started getting the line culture of people lining up for beer releases. But of course, on the beers themselves, one of the first to do barrel-aged beers, to start resuscitating historical recipes. Everything about it was innovative, and they remained like experimental to the end. And Alan Sprints is one of those guys that's like both the brewer owner and intrinsically linked with the brewery.
Yes.
Not like breweries today when you don't necessarily know the brewer or the owner. Like, he was everything of that place. They eventually transitioned to actually having a brew pub because he's a big foodie. So, they actually did kind of stay with the times too. Like, I remember talking to Alan when the hazy IPAs were blowing up, and I was interviewing him, and I'm like, what do you think about this? I'm expecting him to kind of launch in this tirade about all the new trends. And he was like, yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I'm going to try doing that stuff,
He just always has a passion for experiment. I've, had dinner with Alan and spent time with him over the years. And he just always had a passion for just beer and just experimentation and just an interest in the topic and in a way, in a method that sort of changed over the years a little bit, but not really. It just is. I'm still lacking words to try to, not great for a host of a podcast, I suppose, but I'm just kind of blown away by the place and always have failed to fully capture it. So I'm going to turn to Jeff to try to tell me, what was it about Hair of the Dog?
Yeah, I think it's really cool that he did evolve into this kind of senior statesman, but he loved to work with younger people. And like Ezra said, he was always curious about what new people were doing, new breweries. And he would work with some of the hippest breweries. I think it kind of kept him alive, as a creative force. He to go back to the history piece, he founded the brewery in like 93 or 94. And he had just come from Widmer, where he'd been a line brewer. And Widmer at the time, their Hefeweizen, which was a 30 IBU cloudy wheat beer, not a Bavarian Hefeweizen, but an American Hefeweizen. It was really like the buzz beer in Portland, and everybody was making a Hefeweizen, everybody in the Northwest. So it was kind of, that's the context of where the market was. And he came out of the gate with like 10% beers right off the bat.
Yeah.
Which he sold in single bottles. Like, you could buy one bottle. You were not buying these on tap at a pub like you were buying Hefeweizen. You had to buy them by the bottle, and they were these giant boomers. And in 1993 or 4 or whenever it was, people didn't understand 10% beer. That was so far off the grid. It was just mind blowing. And he was like 20 years ahead of where the market ended up. His approach, like Ezra said, was direct to consumer. He had a big following of people who loved his beers, years and years and years before the whales thing kicked in. He was like the original whale.
Yeah.
You could take his bottles anywhere and people would be excited to have them. So,
and his styles were weird, historic styles that no one had ever heard about. And even Michael Jackson might have only written, a half paragraph about in one of his books one time.
Yeah, he had a great connection to the famous Portland beer writer, Fred Eckhart too, which I think connects to that piece that you're talking about.
And I wanted to get into Fred, and so let's do that transition to some of the classic characters of Portland and its beer scene, because it has quite a few, and I think that they also we'll talk Great Notion and Wayfinder and all these newfangled breweries with their fancy beers, but we got to give some props to the folks who came before. Tell me about Jeff. Tell me about Fred Eckhart, who was my personal favorite American beer writer.
Yeah,
beer writer, period.
Yeah, he was great. He was he was a World War II fighter, a Marine, who started writing. He was a home brewer, so he started writing about beer in the late '60s, I think. Ezra, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. You may have this story better than I do. But he was writing about beer for a long time. Wrote a kind of a famous homebrew pamphlet. And then started writing. He was the person who was writing about beer when craft beer first came out, and when he was already an established writer, an established voice. So the brewers were excited to talk to him and have somebody who understood what they were doing, who could write about it. And by the 1990s, when I started to be aware of Fred, he was already this kind of senior statesman, a sort of mascot for the city. You'd see him at all the beer festivals, and he was this sort of short guy with this kind of famous mustache.
Fantastic mustache.
Yeah. He would often wear really bright shirts so you could see him really easily, and he would be surrounded by young people who would treat him like a celebrity. And he, as much as he's known as a writer, I kind of think of him as a storyteller, because that guy would talk for hours, and you just get him rolling, and he would tell you some amazing stories.
Ezra, any thoughts on Fred?
I mean, just mostly to echo what Jeff said. I mean, yeah, he was always a source of wisdom and anecdotes that were often repeated by the industry and by fans, and that mustache, I think, anecdotally inspired a lot of early beer nerds. Saw a lot of beer nerds rocking that mustache back in the day.
And Ezra, let's have you talk about another one of the classic characters of the Portland beer scene, and he rivals, Fred, and that's Don Younger. And Don Younger was the proprietor of the Horse Brass Pub in Portland, a classic old historic beer bar, one of the earliest proponents of craft beer in the city, one of the great supporters, passed away about 5 years ago now. What was it about Don? What was his story?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought Don up. I mean, yeah, he's a legendary character. Famously, he bought horse brass on a napkin after a drunken night, waiting on his car to be fixed. He wasn't even a craft beer fan at first, but he fell in love with English beers like Bass Ale. And then when Cartwright Brewing opened in 1979, I believe Horse Brass was the first place to sell it, and it was only by the bottle at the time. It wasn't that great. Didn't last very long, but shortly after, more breweries started popping up, and I've heard stories about Sierra Nevada's Ken Grossman driving one of the first kegs of pale ale up to the Horse Brass. A lot of the early craft beer pioneers would gather at Horse Brass. It was pretty much the only place you could go to find great beer, other than Produce Row. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, the Oregon Brew Pub bill was crafted at the Horse Brass, which kind of established that culture of brew pubs that Jeff was talking about earlier. And then he was a great publican. He was like, for my money, like the most legendary craft beer industry publican. He was always there. He was always at the end of the bar. He always had a cigarette, scotch, and often a light beer, or English style beer. He would regale you with stories and wisdom, and many people got their starts. Would go to see Don, get some wisdom, some tips from him, and then go out and start something.
Yeah, Don, I only got to meet Don in his home environment once. I saw him in Denver every year. He basically had a bar stool named after him at the famous Falling Rock. He just anchored that end of that bar stool for the GABF. I have no idea whether or not he ever actually attended the festival or not. I think he may have just sat there smoking his cigarettes, when they allowed him to. But I found him in his own home bar at the Horse Breast one time, that I was in Portland, cigarette dangling from his lips, just putting quarter after quarter into the slot machines that he had over in the corner. Just a classic old, crazy bar character who's meant a lot. Jeff, we'll just do briefly here. What did Don mean to the Portland beer scene?
I mean, I think Ezra really captured it well. I don't have a whole lot to add. I think just in the history of beer, an overlooked piece is the retailing side, so the bar side. In order for craft beer to be successful, particularly when you're talking about the 1980s, before people understood brew pubs or selling from their own place, they had to go out and sell draft beer at bars and pubs. And when you talk to the old timers, the founders, the Widmers and Carl Lockhart, folks like that, they'll talk about these incredibly important accounts that helped them get started, without which they never would have gotten started. And Portland has always had this incredible dive bar scene. We have, I think, because on the West Coast we still have cheaper real estate, even though it's really expensive compared to the rest of the country. It's still cheaper than San Francisco and Seattle and LA. Dive bars have managed to kind of hang on, and dive bars were the original place where these beers were sold. That's all there was no such thing as a non-dive bar. I mean, the bars were dive bars, and people like Don were just incredibly important. When you're talking about small volumes, the amount of beer he could turn over at the Horse Brass and bring the energy, that's where the people who liked beer in the late 70s and early 80s, they were the early beer nerds, the proto beer nerds. They would go to the Horse Brass. So it was really important to have a beachhead like that for the original brewers.
We'll be right back with more Beer Travelers. Stop living vicariously through other people's social media posts and get out and make some memories of your own. Join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming tours and start exploring the world one pint at a time with us. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. Want more beer for your ears? The new All About Beer podcast, hosted by M. Sauter and Don Tess, takes a deep, engaging dive into the hottest topics in beer. Do you need to know what the heck a cold IPA is? Check out the first episode wherever you get your pods. New episodes drop every other Thursday. And now, back to Beer Travelers. So now we're back with the rest of the Portland episode of Beer Travelers with our guests Ezra and Jeff. And this is where, if you've listened to any other episode of this podcast, you will know we're going to get into our sort of rapid fire lightning round. We do some quick questions, off the cuff answers. We then end up devolving into a long conversation that gets away from the whole concept of a rapid lightning round. But we'll start off that way. And I've sort of started off asking some similar questions in previous episodes about the 3 best breweries for this or that, and we'll probably get there. But I think I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. And then I think I'm going to ask each of you, what is the best, Jeff, we'll start with you. What is the best adult entertainment club, also known as a strip club, for craft beer in the city? You
should not start with me. You should definitely not start with me. I'm an old man, and I do not go to strip bars anymore because I think it's creepy. So I'm not the guy to ask.
And Ezra may or may not be the guy to ask, but here, I'll give him a chance to answer. But I would love, if we can't get an answer as to where to go, then I'd love to know more particularly what is the role of these places, because it is unique in this country. I am also not somebody who is a particular denizen of these establishments, and but they have a unique role in the history of beer, in craft beer in this particular city. So Ezra, you can either give me your favorite, or you can just talk a little bit about the unique role that that adult entertainment or strip clubs play in the craft beer scene in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big strip club goer, but like if you know anything about that scene and the craft beer, there's really only like one place that comes to mind is like number one, which is Sassy's. And yes, I mean I've only personally been there a couple times, but it is a place where a lot of brewers will come in town, and that's where they end their night. You know, it's a place that has a lot of craft beer on tap. It's always affordable, and I think the strip clubs here, what they offer that are different than other cities is an era of being a local bar, where oftentimes the performers are more empowered, and they're more alternative. You see a lot of like you see fire dancing, you see a lot of like punk, atmosphere, where it's not the strip clubs you see in pop culture, but it's Southeast is a favorite place to hang out and have beers. They've hosted beer events.
Yeah, it's just unique in this. And I don't know that there's any. I can't think of anywhere else in this country where you can mash up the two of those.
Would you like to bring in your other profession here? Because there's a legal explanation for why Portland has so many strip bars. Are you aware of this?
Does this have to do with First Amendment challenges? I can't remember. Yes. So please enlighten us. Well, this did not mean to be a strip club. Anybody who knows me knows that this is not a particular area of interest. But I think it's kind of a fascinating historical note in this city.
It is fascinating. So, years and years ago, I think a couple of lawsuits against strip clubs were filed, and it ultimately went to the Oregon Supreme Court. And apparently, we have one of the most expansive free speech provisions in the Oregon Constitution. And the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that you basically couldn't restrict strip clubs in any way. And so they're protected by Oregon law, and that's one reason why they flourish.
Well, Jeff will hopefully put you on a slightly safer footing here. What is you talked a little bit about it earlier. What is the best dive bar that you would recommend? And that can be one that either has a craft focus or just doesn't at all.
I would recommend for people to go to a dive bar in Portland. If you want to test a city's mettle in terms of craft beer penetration, how much people like craft beer, you should go to a dive bar and see what you find. Because in Portland, you will not find a dive bar that doesn't have, at least in the city limits. You go out a ways, you might find this, but in the city limits, you're not going to find a place you can't find good craft beer. I think I would probably go with I would take people to the Reel 'em In, which is a kind of a classic old dive bar in inner Southeast that is famous for its fried chicken. And I don't know, it's a great dive bar. It's small. There's a lot of regulars. It's cozy, great beer, just comfortable. Yeah. It's a great place.
Ezra, what's your dive bar of choice?
If I had to name one, I probably would say the Reel 'em In too. But the other good examples would be the Vern and the Slammer. And if you want to go for the combo of dive bar and good beer, is Roscoe's, which is actually like world-class beer bar in a dive bar setting.
So if we transition from dive bar to craft beer bar, Ezra, we'll stick with you on this one. This is a city that, as Jeff noted, is a place that was really brew pub heavy, and now has its fair share of tap rooms. But it also, historically has some great beer bars, and we've talked about one of them in Horse Brass. What is another can't miss beer bar?
I'm partial to Roscoe's, as I previously mentioned. Belmont Station's actual beer cafe, and I think, for modern day audiences, I think you can't ignore Loyal Legion as probably being the most current premier one.
Let's have you talk about Belmont Station, and because I know that you'd name checked that you'd also worked there in the past. So
yeah. Actually, my first experience with Belmont Station was when they were just they used to be a tiny little bottle shop next door to the Horse Brass. Mm-hmm. And when I was really getting into beer, I would go there and buy a bunch of bottles and then have a pint at Horse Brass with Don Younger. And then when Belmont Station moved up the street like 3 blocks to their own store with a cafe because they didn't have a bar before there. I started hanging out there, and I was in between jobs actually for a while, and I just sit there and draw and talk, and they were like, "Come work here, come work here." Finally, I was like, "Okay, I'll fill in," and then I ended up working there for about 2 years. In the early days, there wasn't many people coming in there, but it really established itself for like high curation,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a European cafe vibe to it.
Very much so.
Um, cool art, cool signage. It's expanded now to have a back patio and a food truck, and it's really a hub for sure for both the neighborhood and beer nerds from out of town.
This also gives us an opportunity to talk about one of Portland's great beer writers and one of the other great characters of that scene, and that's Lisa Morrison. What can you tell us about Lisa?
Me? That's right.
Yep.
Well, I'm sure Jeff's known her a lot longer than I did, but I first met her when she was writing for a number of publications, and she had her Beer O'Clock radio show. And I was lucky enough to be a guest to talk about a lot of beer events and stuff like that with her when she was hosting that. And even the first event I ever put together was a pub crawl with Lisa Morrison. And then she's transitioned out of writing to being the owner of Belmont Station now. So she's definitely taken on a kind of a senior role and a pioneer of the industry of both journalism, but also being one of the first women publicans.
I cannot imagine doing a transition from beer writing to actually working in the trade. But Jeff, tell me about Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa's awesome. She's about my vintage, so we were both a little bit younger than the first pioneers.
Mm-hmm.
And Lisa was, I think, a big defender of the old crowd, and she really was somebody who wrote about and championed the founding generation, and I think has shepherded them and kept their memory alive, those stories alive, probably more than anybody else. If you get her to talk about folks like that, she starts beaming, and she'll tell you some wonderful stories. She's also just a delightful person. I don't know that anybody who's ever met her hasn't had a good experience and won't talk favorably about what a delight she is.
Agreed.
Yeah. So that's she's got that going for her.
So let's get into some more of these traditional questions so that we've made it this far into this podcast without actually talking about any of the modern great names in craft beer. So let's get to it. Jeff, what are your top 3 local brew? And some of these questions are not fair. I didn't say they were fair. They're going to be tough. We have to choose favorites, and this list can change from day to day to week to week. But let's start with the heavy hitters. What are your top 3 local breweries for folks who are fans of IPA? And I know that can be such a broad question, whether it's West Coast, Haze, what have you. I'm just going to just put it all together. Best 3 breweries for IPA.
I think you got to start with Breakside. Full disclosure, Breakside is about to sponsor my blog. So just want to mention that.
Good. Breweries, get out there and sponsor content. I support that. But thank you for the disclosure. We'll take it.
Yeah. I do an annual thing where I talk about the best breweries, and I've been talking about Breakside is one of the best breweries in Portland for long before this year. So part of my full disclosure. But Breakside is really the brewery, I think, that if everybody talks about regionality in beer, especially with IPAs. What is a Northwest IPA? Does it differ? Is West Coast? Can you bifurcate West Coast between the Southern California and the Northwest? How is it different than the East Coast and the Midwest? All those questions people are curious about. And when they come to Portland, I would say the best place to start to kind of get a sense of that is Breakside, because they do, for the most part, classic West Coast IPAs. But ones that have continued to evolve and be updated. Their flagship it's called Breakside IPA. Most of their beers have a name, but IPA is their flagship. That's a beer that has gone through evolution since they first launched it. They won the GABF American IPA for that beer, and I think they won it right after it went through one of its first kind of tune-ups. So it's a brewery that is always thinking about what where the market is and how to meet it, but really within this context. And they did have one hazy IPA during the Great Hazy thing that was kind of a regular hazy IPA, but for the most part, all their beers are really classically West Coast. So you got to start with Breakside. If you come to Portland, you want to understand IPAs, you go to Breakside. A small brewery, and you made me go first, which is if you're gonna ask Ezra the same thing, I may be screwing Ezra here. So
Well, that's the benefit of this, is that the next question will be for Ezra, and he's just going to get it right back to you. So,
all right. I think Ruse is probably a brewery worth checking out. They are one of the more recent entrants. Actually, they're not that recent because COVID has made me confused about everything. Before COVID, they were kind of new. Now I guess they're like 5 years old or something. But they also they do their flagship is the West Coast IPA, but they also do a bunch of kind of more modern, juicy, sort of quasi hazies. They may do some classic hazies too, but they're kind of more in line with where the like what they're doing out in Boston, for example. And my third, I mean, we're going to talk about Wayfinder for other things, but Kevin Davey was sort of the guy who popularized cold IPA. If you talk to him, he will talk about how that was not, many of the things that he pulled together did not start with him, as is true with almost every brewer. Worth noting that the single origin thing is usually a myth. But the cold IPA is the thing, the idea and the name is Kevin Davies at Wayfinder. So going there and tasting his cold IPA is probably something people want to do too. But if you go to Wayfinder, you should only drink one IPA, and that's the cold IPA, and then you should drink his lagers.
And I'd recommend to give another plug, the All About Beer podcast with M. Sauter and Don Test actually interviewed Kevin in their very first episode. So go back to, if you want the details on that one, we got, I think, a good 45-minute episode. So go back from that. But now it's Ezra's.
Entertaining. So he's an entertaining listen.
Ezra, your turn. IPA time. What are your favorite three places for IPA?
I mean, I agree with Jeff on two of his picks of Breakside and Ruse. And Wayfinder, I agree, it's strong, but it wouldn't quite make my top list. But I think Jeff is really overlooking Von Ebert Brewing, recent gold medal winner for IPA at GABF. Von Ebert's definitely arguably number one right now in Portland for IPA for American.
I agree. I changed my answer.
You're already locked in. We got Ezra's going to tell us about Von Ebert. Yeah, so talk to us about the breweries and then tell us this. Tell us the story here of Von Ebert. This is where we start getting off of the subject.
Okay. Well, Von Ebert is really. I think they were wise early on, where they've decided to really focus on American IPA, which I think Jeff was kind of talking around but not using those terms earlier. What I call American IPA or contemporary American IPA, which is more of like a modern update of the West Coast IPA style, which Ruse is really all about. But Von Ebert has focused on that, and they've focused on their craft lager program very wisely, I think, as those are the two biggest things, at least on the West Coast. But they're constantly innovating. They're constantly tinkering, as any good brewery does. But I'd say they're less afraid of it than most with their flagship recipes. And they really just dialed it in with this beer called Volatile Substance IPA, a beer that had a year where it won like 3 different gold medals, and then they made a fresh out version of it, also won a gold medal. That's an amazing beer. And yeah, Von Ebert is consistently one of the best breweries in the state, across the board. One of those breweries where across the board everything is great. The other one that I would mention is, if you're a fan of the hazies, you got to say Great Notion, which I know we've mentioned before. But if you're in a hazy, double hazy, that sort of stuff, Great Notion's a must go.
We haven't gotten too far into Great Notion. So Ezra, tell us a little bit more about the brewery. Great
Notion was founded by 3 neighbors, actually. And they were all homebrewers, live up in the Killingsworth neighborhood. I actually was lucky enough to go over and hang out with those guys a few times when they were homebrewing. But they were making the hazy beer before really anybody else was on the West Coast. I think when they were homebrewing it, it was only, I don't even think it was fully a thing on the East Coast yet. It was sort of being, few breweries were dabbling in it. But they jumped on that, and they also jumped on mixed culture beer. And then obviously, when they finally found a place, and they picked a brewery going out of business to open this funky little spot, it was the hazy beer that really put them on the map, and they've doubled and tripled down on that. Of the beers that we talk about juicy beers. I mean, a lot of that came out of Great Notion. I mean, their first beers like Juice Box were the kind of like IPAs where you, at the time especially, they were so mind blowing. You'd be like, how much juice per barrel is added here?
So we'll go back to Jeff here and talk about Ezra noted that IPA and lager are really kind of some defining things on the West Coast. Where this may be a difficult one. This is one that maybe a lot of folks don't necessarily associate with Portland. But what are the top 3 breweries for lager? Because the lager scene there is somewhat quietly amazing.
Yeah, I would say that Portland is the best lager city in America, and I recently last year I did
that's some bold statement.
But it's a bold statement. Yeah, it's a really bold statement.
I'm here. Here's the argument. Go ahead.
Yeah, I traveled around to test it out on a book tour, and I really feel that that's the case. We have a bunch of breweries that have lagers in their flagship line, and they sell a ton of lagers. So it's not just that you can find lagers here; it's that breweries are selling a tremendous amount of lager beer. And we have Freem Brewing is not in Portland. It's down the river in Hood River, but pretty big brewery, and they're all in on lager, so it's not a niche thing. They're selling a lot of lagers. We talked about Breakside. One of their flagships is a Pilsner. Most breweries will have at least one beer that's a full-time year-round lager, and many will have multiples. We have I think Von Ebert, which Ezra mentioned, is sort of a leading lager brewery. You've got Rosenstadt, which is a kind of a nomad brewery that does mostly lagers. Zeugelhaus does mostly German lagers. Wayfinder does lagers. So we have not only do we have breweries that sell a bunch of lagers among other stuff, but we have a number of breweries that basically only sell lagers as well. And I think we're going to talk at some point about Upright Brewing. I think Upright gets some credit for being, and Ezra mentioned them a while back, being maybe the brewery that first popularized the Pilsners, and it was pretty early in the aughts, or in the late aughts that they got on it. And I think one of the interesting things was everybody was kind of the chefs in town. Portland's a pretty good dining city, and around 2010 or something, as these IPAs were slaughtering menus, people discovered that a good Pilsner would actually complement their menu. So we started seeing Upright's Pilsner all over town because chefs loved it, and the founder Alex Canoom is sort of a foodie himself, so I think he had a kind of an orientation to that. So just to say, there's a lot of lagers in Portland. I think my 3 favorite lager breweries are probably Wayfinder, which we talked about, and I think another brewery we got to mention. It's not in Portland, but it's a really important brewery in the Portland market is Heater Allen. It was the first all lager brewery. It's located about an hour away in wine country. They were the ones that really championed lagers to begin with. So important brewery. You got to mention Wayfinder here. I think Kevin Davies doing amazing work with his lagers. I just really, really love his lagers. I don't. Zeugelhaus. I'm gonna champion Zeugelhaus. They're out in a really remote kind of place that nobody ever goes to. Alan Taylor is their German trained brewer. He lived in Germany and was a brewery manager at a couple of breweries in Germany before he came back. His Pilsner has won the GABF gold medal. Rosenstadt does great work. Whether you want to call them a brewery or not, I think they fly under the radar. I've mentioned many breweries here. Um,
you're just going through the whole list. You're going to cover them
I'm
all,
just going
so
through the
that
whole
when I
list.
ask Ezra this question, Ezra,
Yeah.
so where are you pointing? Where are you taking people for a lager? He's like, well, Jeff already talked about all of them. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Yeah.
Jeff even took up extra space by saying Rosenstadt twice.
Yes. So if you were to pick one place, Ezra, since Jeff has gone down through the entire list of the possibilities, where would you take people for? Where are you going for a lager?
Yeah. I mean, I would echo what Jeff has said. I agree with a lot of what he said. And I want to reiterate, why Portland is such a good lager scene. It may not be like the most buzzed about nationally, but I think that's because we were so early on it with breweries like Heater Allen and Upright, who've been brewing it, since 2007. I think Heater Allen opened around 2005 or six. The all lager brewery, way before anyone was like figuring out the lagers. Wayfinder has done a good job, I think, of making it sexy, modern, sexy. But the scene in Portland's so good that the recent GABF gold medal winning German style Pilsner brewery wasn't even mentioned, which is Ex Novo. There's breweries here that have won like gold medals in it that people don't even think of as being lager breweries, because that's how
Ex
good
Novo
lagers
is just Ex Novo is one of these breweries that is flying under the radar. Nobody's ever heard of it. Solid beer across the board. They do everything great. Yeah, totally.
One of the questions, Ezra, that I always ask that Jeff has already preempted here because he loves to name all these breweries is, what is one great place that doesn't get enough attention, or literally the quote is flies under the radar? Jeff's given his, what even though you prompted it. Ezra, what is your flying under the radar place? A place that maybe deserves a second look, or one that just doesn't get enough love?
There's so many of those. Away Days would be high up there. They're a British style, but modern British style brewery, brewing kind of like the beers that you might have today in England. Or I think a lot of people, when you think of British style beer, you're thinking of the older, stodgier stuff. This is like a modern day British style. They do cask beer, and they do IPA. But also, I really think Little Beast Brewing is really underrated as well. They kind of got an early reputation as being primarily fruited mixed culture stuff, which is amazing. But then I think a lot of people then kind of didn't realize they can make amazing IPAs and lagers too.
And Ezra, I love you guys because you guys are just great with the transitions. This is why it's nice having writers on here. You're writing this for me. Where are you taking folks for sour or mixed fermentation or mixed culture beer, Ezra?
Little Beast, like I said, and I got to bring it back to Upright Brewing. Upright Brewing probably number one in that department. I mean, that was the original focus of the brewery when they opened in 2009. They've branched out, but you can still always find some world class mixed culture beers there. I mean, you have to mention Cascade Brewing for sours. I mean, it's probably the brewery that's most well known for it, but in my opinion, not really the best anymore.
Well, that was one of the interesting things I'd noticed. We're gone about 50 minutes into this podcast or so, somewhere in that neighborhood. And Cascade, if you ask folks about Portland beer, you're going to get a lot of big names. But one of those names that's going to come up for folks is Cascade. Jeff or Ezra, one of these other questions I often ask that people don't love to answer is name a brewery that you think needs to sort of step up their game or has been slacking. And I'm not saying Cascade's that one for you. But what is it? What should people know about Cascade?
They should know that Cascade was originally founded as actually Raccoon Lodge, which is a brew pub, who made fairly standard pub style beers that were popular in the 90s, but then kind of stumbled upon sour beer in probably around 2010-ish or so. Actually, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And then they quickly realized that was something that they could build their identity around and be really good at it. So they built up this huge barrel program, and one of the earlier breweries here to do blending. But they also always wanted to stay away from Brettanomyces because they were a little, afraid about infection, because they always did keep some clean beers. But it's interesting now because they've always continued to make clean beers and IPAs and ambers, but now no one knows those beers, even though that's how they had like 10 years of just making those beers. But I mean, I think between changes of ownership and management and brewers, they've really just kind of been sitting on their laurels. And I'm even hearing that they don't even brew that much anymore. Really, a lot of it's blending.
And Jeff, for you, I'll ask the same question. I think it's valuable as somebody who travels to various places. You love to hear about the places that are great, but also you want to hear about the places that maybe, if your time is limited, you should consider going elsewhere. Are there any places that you think that may fit that criteria, that either need to kind of step up a little bit or have just kind of been a little bit slacking?
Yeah, I think Cascade is a good place to start. It's a brewery that there's great mixed firm beers in Oregon. Portland is maybe lesser known. That we have some breweries outside of Portland that are really well known for that kind of beer and do spectacular work. If people were coming to Portland, I would definitely say go to Little Beast, go to Upright first. I think Upright is some of the most accomplished mixed fermentation beer you're going to find. Alex and his team are exceptional blenders, so they produce this stuff that is super balanced, really nice acidity. Like, not, one thing that Cascade is famous for is slap you across the face with ultra acidity. Upright is sort of the fine wine equivalent. It's like the old masters who make these incredibly burnished, lovely beers that you just can drink. You could order a pint of some of Alex's mixed firm beers and really knock it back. And in fact, a few years ago, he has a regular beer called Pathways, a saison. Is that what it's called? Pathways? That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was 8%, and it did not taste 8%. It was mixed fermentation saison that you could order by the pint. And man, oh man, I got in trouble with that beer from time to time. It was just fruity and a little bit acidic and so complex and lovely and approachable, and you could get in trouble. And then Von Ebert, we got to go back to Von Ebert, also making exceptional. I would definitely go to Von Ebert if you like sour beers before Cascade. So those are three: Upright, Little Beast, and Von Ebert for mixed firm.
As we start to wrap up here, if you had one neighborhood in which to recommend folks go to a pub crawl, where, and maybe it's one that folks from out of town miss, that they wouldn't necessarily think to go to, where would you recommend folks go?
I mean, so my number one for this has some caveats, which is the Buckman neighborhood, which is inner southeast Portland. Definitely the densest area for breweries and tap rooms, but it's also a really gritty neighborhood. So it is a neighborhood where
I live.
What?
That's where I live.
Yeah. It's mostly because Jeff has stayed there. It's stayed gritty around there.
That seems fair.
Developed, yeah. In its natural habitat. You're kind of on the outskirts of it, though, Jeff, aren't you? You're the nice part of the Buckman.
No, I'm pretty gritty. I look across at one of those old 1960s weird apartment developments, and anyway, we don't need to go where I live, but it's gritty. I have some grit.
Yeah, so it's a great neighborhood. There's a ton of new places, there's old places. Your Cascade is down there that we were already talking about, but you have the new location of Ecliptic Brewing. You have probably the most buzzed about new brewery in town, Grand Fir Brewing. You have a new location of Level Beer. Loyal Legion is right there. Some of these are right on talking the greater Buckman area. Don't slap me for being like that's adjacent, but you can walk between all these spots. But the only problem is you might have to walk in the street around some broken glass, but it's pretty safe, and it's the neighborhood I find myself in most frequently right now for beer crawls.
And Jeff, how about yourself? What do you recommend? Maybe outside of your own gritty, self-made neighborhood.
I mean, there actually on my website I have a few pub crawls if you want to do these that you can check out. The Portland is a compact city. Its inner core is pretty compact. So there are a lot of places where you can do pretty quick pub calls. We might talk about downtown Pearl District. You can get to Von Ebert's downtown thing in the Pearl. It's really close to 10 Barrel, which is where Whitney Burnside, who just recently founded Grand Fir, used to brew, and she won a ton of awards there. She was she hired as her replacement a woman brewer who is a woman of some renown, and so that will continue on. Maddie, so that's cool. And Deschutes is downtown too, so you can also hit that. And you're not really very far away from a Great Notion and one of the Breakside locations when you're in that region too. So that's, if you're downtown, you have some places to go. And there was one thing we have not, there's one brewery of the 8,000 we mentioned that we did not mention, which is Living House, which is a new brewery that does lagers and a pretty tight IPA for their flagship that opened in that kind of, we'll see if it is a snake bit place, but it was where the Commons was originally, and Modern Times, and now Living House has taken over, and it's a collective of 3 brewers who are kind of well known for their accomplishments elsewhere. So that's a brewery to watch, along with Grand Fir, a couple of new breweries. And we haven't mentioned Steeplejack too, which if you ever want to go to drink a beer in a sweet old church with like in the cathedral area of it, it's a really cool place to drink beer, and they do a lot of kind of cool old school beers.
Can add on what Jeff was saying. Living House is also in that kind of greater Buckman area too, so that another reason. And Living House and Grand Fir, as we both just mentioned, are probably the 2 hottest new breweries, so you can hit those and some old school ones in Buckman. And then I wanted to agree with Jeff on Steeplejack. If you're going to take somebody to one place for just like the overall experience, the majesty of it, like, you have to say Steeplejack.
Well, I like that as a place to end. I could continue this conversation. I have a whole host of more questions. We may need to do this again in a few months, because I don't think you can capture the essence of this city. We've done a lot of our best work here in history and things like that, but this is a city that is, very exciting. I'm very excited to get back out there to try, if nothing else, to go through and test your theories of whether or not Portland is the best lager city in America. I'm willing to let that be the case, and I can't wait to give it a shot. But where online can people find you and your work? Let's start with Ezra.
Newschoolbeer.com is the main spot, but you can also follow my personal Instagram, Samurai Artist, where you see some of my writing other places.
And Jeff, besides just vacationing and relaxing and not really doing much of anything, eventually you'll get back to actually doing something for a living. Where can people find you?
Beervanablog.com is my site, and you can find anything else I'm doing there, including books and other things. And I like to give a shout out to Ezra. I don't know how many people outside of Portland might read Ezra's blog or site, because it is focused on Portland, but it is definitely the most exhaustive source for Portland-based stuff. If you ever want to find anything out about any brewery in Portland, it's the place to go. New School's the place to go. And Ezra always has the scoop, so I don't even try to get a scoop anymore. If something's happening, Ezra knows about it before anybody else.
You gotta love that support for one another, and this is why I had both of you on here. Ezra and Jeff, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the Beer Travelers podcast. If you have a suggestion for a town we should visit next, please drop us a line at podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Please give our podcast a review wherever you listen. It really helps folks find out about us. And if you like the episode, tell a friend and post on your socials. Interested in learning more about connecting with an engaged, energetic, and interested audience of curious beer consumers and brewers? We have many different advertising opportunities, including through our podcasts, website, newsletter, and social media channels. For more information, please contact us at podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Stop living vicariously through other people's social media posts and get out and make some memories of your own. Join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming tours and start exploring the world one pint at a time with us. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. All About Beer is back and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts. My pick for a place to have a beer in Portland is not one of the great hype tap rooms or historic breweries, but instead a fun, quirky spot. You'll hear us briefly discuss McMenamins on the show, one of the original brewers in the region. Founded by two brothers, McMenamins is a family-owned chain of brew pubs, breweries, and other venues often housed in historic or revitalized spaces. My pick for Portland is one such place, the Kennedy School. Once a local elementary school, the school actually closed in the 1970s. It sat vacant for a long time, only to be later reborn and transformed into a hotel and brewery by the McMenamins. The place retains all the charm of the original school, complete with detention halls, which have been transformed into bars. It's a pretty unforgettable spot for a pint.